What's up, folks? I'm Dan, and welcome to I've Been Meaning to Read That, the show where I read books out loud that I've been meaning to read. Let's go. Folks, I know it's been a little bit since I recorded, but I have a good reason for now recording. Last weekend was my birthday, and I was very busy. But I'm good now. Because it's spring break. I'm sitting here on a Friday afternoon just talking to you guys. I'm very excited. Now, for those of you who think spring break is a little unfair, teachers get all this time off, etc. Consider this. If one more kid said to me, F this, or what are we doing while the instructions were on the board, or they just skipped class, I was going to probably commit a crime. Just assault of a minor. I don't know if of a minor makes it worse, legally, but it definitely makes it worse, morally speaking. So you might think, teachers just don't have to work as much. Well, we need the break. And so do the kids. The kids really needed the break. So anyways, also, I'm not just going to spend my spring break sitting around doing nothing. First off, I'm recording for you. And second off, my wife has this big old list of stuff to do out in the yard. I got to cut down some trees and dig up some bushes and get rid of some wood chips and spread some mulch, all that good stuff. Classic homeowner nonsense. All right. Well, let's find out who is really going to be working hard and suffering in this week's episode of Les Miserables. Chapter 4. Monsieur Madeleine in Mourning. Early in 1821, the newspapers announced the passing of Monsieur Myriel, Bishop of Digne, known as Monseigneur Bienvenu, who had died in the odor of sanctity at the age of 82. A detail may be added which the newspapers omitted to mention. For several years prior to his death, the bishop had been blind, but contented in his blindness, having his sister at his side. We may remark in passing that to be blind and beloved may, in this world where nothing is perfect, be among the most strangely exquisite forms of happiness. To have a wife, daughter, or sister continually at call, a devoted being who is there because we have need of her, and because she cannot live without us, to be able to measure her affection by the constancy of her presence and reflect, if she gives me all her time, it is because I have all her heart. To see the thought and default of the face, weigh fidelity and exclusion of the world, hear the rustle of a dress as though it were the rustling of wings, the comings and goings, the everyday speech, the snatch of song, to be conscious every minute of our own attraction, feeling the more powerful for our weakness, becoming in obscurity, and through obscurity, the star around which an angel gravitates, there are few felicities to equal this. The supreme happiness in life is the assurance of being loved for oneself, even in spite of oneself. And this assurance the blind man possesses. In his affliction, to be served is to be caressed. Does he lack anything? No. Possessing love, he is not deprived of light. A love, moreover, that is wholly pure. There can be no blindness where there is this certainty. Soul gropes for soul and finds it. And the found and proven soul is a woman. A hand sustains you, and it is hers. Lips touch your forehead, and they are her lips. The breathing at your side is her breath. To possess her, every feeling, from devotion to pity, to be never left in solitude, to have the support of that gentle frailty, that slender, unbreakable reed, to feel the touch of Providence in her hands, and be able to clasp it in your own arms. A palpable God. What happiness can be greater? The heart, that secret celestial flower, mysteriously blooms, and one would not exchange one's darkness for all light. The angel's spirit is there, always there. If she moves away, it is to return. She fades like a dream, to reappear like reality. We feel the approaching warmth, and with its coming, serenity. Our gaiety and ecstasy overflow. We are radiant in our darkness. There are the countless small cares, those trifles that become huge in our void. The tenderest tones of the feminine voice are used for our comfort and replace the vanished world. They are a spiritual caress. Seeing nothing, we feel ourselves adored. It is a paradise in shadow. This was the paradise from which Monseigneur Bienvenu passed to the other. His death was reported in the local paper at Montreuil-sur-Mer, and on the following day Monsieur Madeleine appeared clad in black with a band of crape around his hat. The matter was much discussed in the town, since it seemed to throw a light on his background. "He's in mourning for the Bishop of D," said the drawing-rooms, and this redounded greatly to his credit, entitling him, for the moment, to a higher degree of consideration on the part of the aristocracy of Montreuil-sur-Mer. The infinitesimal Faubourg Saint-Germain of the town was disposed to abandon its attitude of aloofness, since he appeared to be related to a bishop. Monsieur Madeleine was made aware of his promotion by an increase in the number of curtsies he received from the older ladies and smiles from the younger ones. One evening, a dowager of that small circle, entitled by her ancient lineage to be inquisitive, ventured to question him. "No doubt, Monsieur le Maire, the late Bishop of D is your cousin?" "No, madame." "But," said the lady, "you are in mourning for him." He replied, "That is because in my youth I was a lackey in his family." It was also noted that whenever a vagrant boy appeared in the town looking for chimneys to sweep, the mayor sent for him, asking his name, and gave him money. The word went round among the young Savoyards, and a great many of them came. End of Chapter 4. Chapter 5. Flickers on the Horizon. By degrees, all opposition to him had died down. At first, Monsieur Madeleine had been subjected to the ill report and calumny that by a sort of law afflict all those who become prominent. This had gradually dwindled into malicious anecdote and gossip, which at length had ceased entirely. Respect and cordial esteem for him had grown until, in about 1821, the words Monsieur le Maire were spoken in Montreuil-sur-Mer in much the same tone as the words Monsieur l'Évêque had been spoken in D in 1815. People came from 20 miles around to consult Monsieur Madeleine. He resolved disputes, prevented lawsuits, reconciled enemies. Every man trusted him to judge fairly, as though his guiding spirit were a book of natural law. It was like an epidemic of veneration spreading, in a matter of 6 or 7 years, throughout the province. One man only was wholly immune from the contagion, and, regardless of what Monsieur Madeleine did, refused to succumb to it, as though from an unassailable instinct of wariness and distrust. It seems, indeed, that there exists in some men a genuinely animal instinct, pure and authentic, as are all instincts, which determines their antipathies and sympathies, inexorably discriminating between one person and another without hesitation or afterthought, neither weakening nor contradicting itself, which is lucid within its own obscurity, infallible and overweening, rejecting every counsel of intelligence and every compromise of reason, and which, disdaining all outward appearances, secretly warns the man-dog of the presence of the man-cat, the man-fox of the presence of the man-lion. It happened often that Monsieur Madeleine, walking amiably through the streets and receiving the affectionate greetings of his fellow citizens, was observed by a tall man in a gray tailcoat carrying a heavy stick and wearing a low-brimmed hat. This person would watch him until he was out of sight, standing with arms crossed, slowly shaking his head and thrusting his lower lip against the upper, until it reached his nose in a sort of purposeful grimace which seemed to say, "Who is that man? I've seen him before. Anyways, he isn't fooling me." He was one of those people who, even glimpsed, make an immediate impression. There was an intensity about him that was almost a threat. His name was Javert, and he belonged to the police. In Montreuil-sur-Mer, he performed the distasteful but necessary duties of a police inspector. He had not witnessed Madeleine's beginnings. When he took up his present post, which he owed to the influence of the Paris prefect of police, the manufacturer's fortune was already made, and Père Madeleine had become Monsieur Madeleine. Certain police officers have a particular cast of countenance in which primitive instincts are mingled with an air of authority. Javert had the air of authority, but without the primitive instincts. It is our belief that if the soul were visible to the eye, every member of the human species would be seen to correspond to some species of the animal world, and a truth scarcely perceived by thinkers would be readily confirmed, namely, that from the oyster to the eagle, from the swine to the tiger, all animals are to be found in men, and each of them exists in some man, sometimes several at a time. Animals are nothing but the portrayal of our virtues and vices made manifest to our eyes, the visible reflections of our souls. God displays them to us to give us food for thought. But since they are no more than shadows, he has not made them educable in the full sense of the word. Why should he do so? Our souls, on the other hand, being realities with a purpose proper to themselves, have been endowed with intelligence, that is to say, the power to learn. Well-managed social education can extract from any human spirit, no matter of what kind, such usefulness as it contains. This, of course, is to confine the matter within the limits of our visible earthly life, without prejudging the deeper questions of the interior and ulterior nature of creatures which are not men. The visible personality affords us no grounds for denying the existence of a latent personality. Having made this reservation, we may proceed. Granted the supposition that in every man there is contained a species of the animal kingdom, we may at once place Inspector Javert. The Asturian peasants believe that in every wolf litter there is a dog whelp which the mother kills, because otherwise, when it grows larger, it will devour the rest of her young. Endow this dog with a human face, and you have Javert. He had been born in prison, the son of a fortune-teller whose husband was in the galleys. As he grew older, he came to believe that he was outside society with no prospect of ever entering it. But he noted that there were two classes of men whom society keeps inexorably at arm's length, those who prey upon it and those who protect it. The only choice open to him was between these two. At the same time, he was a man with a profound instinct for correctitude, regularity, and probity, and with a consuming hatred for the vagabond order to which he himself belonged. He joined the police. He did well. At the age of 40, he was an inspector, having, as a young man, been a prison warder in the Midi. But before going further, let us look more closely at the human face which we have ascribed to Javert. It consisted of a flat nose with two wide nostrils flanked by huge side whiskers. A first glance at those two thickets enclosing two caverns was disconcerting. When Javert laughed, a rare and terrible occurrence, his thin lips parted to display not only his teeth, but his gums, and a deep and savage furrow formed on either side of his nose, as though on the muzzle of a beast of prey. Javert, unsmiling, was a bulldog. When he laughed, he was a tiger. For the rest, a narrow brow and a large jaw, locks of hair concealing the forehead and falling over the eyebrows, permanent wrinkles between the eyes resembling a star of wrath, a dark gaze, a tight, formidable mouth, a look of fierce command. His mental aptitude was compounded of two very simple principles, admirable in themselves, but which, by carrying them to extremes, he made almost evil: respect for authority and hatred of revolt against it. Theft, murder, and every other crime were to him all forms of revolt. Everybody who played any part in the running of the state, from the first minister to the garde champêtre, was invested in his eyes with a kind of mystical sanctity, and he felt nothing but contempt, aversion, and disgust for those who, even if only once, transgressed beyond the bounds of law. His judgments were absolute, admitting no exceptions. He said on the one hand, "The official cannot be wrong. The magistrate is always right." And on the other hand, "Those others are lost. No good can come of them." He shared unreservedly the extreme views of those who attribute to human law some sort of power to damn, or, if you prefer, to place on record the damned, and who set a river Styx at the entrance to society. He was stoical, earnest, austere, given to gloomy pondering, and like all fanatics, both humble and arrogant. His eyes were cold and piercing as a gimlet. His whole life was contained in two words, wakefulness and watchfulness. He drew a straight line through all that is most torturous in this world. He possessed the conscience appropriate to his function, and his duties were his religion. He was a spy in the way that other men are priests. Woe to those who fell into his hands. He would have arrested his own father escaping from prison and denounced his mother for breaking parole, and he would have done it with a glow of conscious rectitude. His life was one of rigorous austerity, isolation, self-denial, and chastity without distractions, a life of unswerving duty, with the police service playing the role that Sparta played for the Spartans, ceaseless alertness, fanatical honesty, the spy carved in marble, a mingling of Brutus and Vidocq. Javert's entire personality was that of the man who watches from concealment. The mystical school of Joseph de Maistre, which at that time was enriching the extreme monarchist journals with a high-flown cosmogony, would certainly have regarded him as a symbol. Normally, one could never see his forehead, hidden by his hat, his eyes buried beneath his eyebrows, his chin sunk in his cravat, his hands drawn up within his sleeves, or the stick which he carried beneath his cloak. But when the time was ripe, all this would spring out of hiding as though from an ambush. The narrow, bony forehead, the baleful glare, the menacing chin, the big hands, and threatening cudgel. In his rare leisure moments he read books, although he hated reading, which is to say that he was not wholly illiterate. The fact was, now and then, apparent in his speech. As we have said, he had no vices. When he was pleased with himself, he allowed himself a pinch of snuff, his sole concession to human frailty. It is small wonder that Javert was the terror of that class of people who are listed in the annual statistics of the Ministry of Justice as gens sans avis, persons without status. The mere mention of his name sufficed to scatter them. The sight of him petrified them. Such was this formidable man. Javert had an eye constantly fixed on Monsieur Madeleine, an eye filled with suspicion and puzzlement. Madeleine had eventually become aware of this, but he seemed to regard it as a matter of no importance. He never questioned Javert, neither sought him out nor avoided him, and bore his heavy scrutiny without appearing to notice it, treating him, as he treated everyone, with an easy good humor. From certain words Javert had let fall, it was evident that secretly, with the inquisitiveness of his kind, which is as much a matter of instinct as of deliberate intent, he had studied all the traces of his earlier life which Monsieur Madeleine had left in other places. He seemed to know, and hinted as much, that someone had been making inquiries in another part of the country regarding a family that had disappeared. He was once heard to mutter to himself, "I think I've got him." But after that he was moodily silent. It seemed that the thread he had thought to grasp was broken. For the rest, and the qualification is necessary for words that may otherwise bear too absolute a meaning, there can be nothing truly infallible in any human being, and instinct, of its nature, may be confused, misled, and perverted. Otherwise it would be superior to intelligence, and animals would be more enlightened than men. Javert was plainly disconcerted by Monsieur Madeleine's ease and tranquillity of manner, but an occasion arose when his own strange demeanor attracted the notice of Monsieur Madeleine. What happened was as follows. End of Chapter 5. Chapter 6. Père Fauchelevent. Passing one morning through one of the unpaved alleys of the town, Madeleine heard sounds of disturbance and saw a group of people gathered not far away. He found, on going up to them, that an old man known as Père Fauchelevent had been trapped beneath his cart after the horse had fallen. Fauchelevent was one of the few people who at that time were still unfriendly to Monsieur Madeleine. A former law scrivener, comparatively educated for a countryman, his business had already been going downhill when Madeleine arrived in the district. He had watched the rise of the humble day laborer while he, a craftsman, was on the road to ruin, and, consumed with jealousy, had done what he could to injure Madeleine whenever the chance arose. Eventually he had gone bankrupt, and being an elderly man without wife or family, possessing nothing but a horse and cart, he had since then earned his living as a carrier. The horse had broken both hind legs and could not get up. Fauchelevent was caught between the wheels. The manner of the fall was such that the whole weight of the heavily loaded cart was on his chest. Attempts had been made to drag him clear, but without success. An ill-judged, clumsy movement, a sudden pull of the cart, might crush him. There was no way of releasing him except by lifting the cart from below. Javert, who was already on the spot, had sent for a jack. The crowd drew back respectfully as Madeleine approached. He at once asked if a jack was available, and was told that someone had gone for one to the nearest smithy, but that it would take a quarter of an hour to bring it. "A quarter of an hour?" exclaimed Madeleine. It had rained hard the day before. The ground was very soft, and the cart was sinking deeper into the mud, pressing more heavily on the old man's chest. In a matter of minutes his ribs might give way. "This can't wait a quarter of an hour," said Madeline, turning to the men standing round. "There's nothing else to be done." "But it'll be too late. Don't you see the cart sinking deeper?" "All the same." "Look," said Madeline. "There's still room for a man to crawl under the cart and lift it on his back. In half a minute the old man can be pulled out. Is there anyone here with the muscle and the heart? I'm offering 5 louis d'or." No one moved. 10, said Madeline. The bystanders avoided his gaze. One of them muttered, "He'd have to be devilish strong. He'd risk being crushed himself." "Come," said Madeline, 20. There was still no response. "It's not that we don't want to," a voice said. Monsieur Madeleine turned and recognized Javert. He had not noticed him before. "It's a question of strength," Javert went on. "You need to be tremendously strong to lift a load like that on your back." With his eyes fixed upon Madeleine, he said slowly, "I have known only one man, Monsieur Madeleine, capable of doing what you ask." Madeleine started. Still with his eyes upon him, Javert added casually, "He was a convict." "Ah," said Madeleine. "In Toulon prison." Madeleine turned pale. Meanwhile, the cart was sinking, and Père Fauchelevent was grasping and crying. "I'm suffocating! My ribs are breaking! For God's sake, do something!" Madeleine looked about him. "Is there no one prepared to save this man's life for 20 louis d'or?" No one moved. Javert repeated, "I have known only one man capable of doing the work of a jack, the man I mentioned." "It's crushing me!" the old man cried. Madeleine hesitated for another instant, met with the vulture gaze of Javert, looking round at the motionless bystanders, and smiled sadly. Without a word, he went on his knees, and before anyone could speak, was under the cart. There was a moment of hideous uncertainty and silence. Madeleine, almost flat on his stomach beneath that terrifying weight, was seen to make 2 fruitless efforts to bring his knees and elbows together. A voice cried out, "Père Madeleine, come out of there!" Old Fauchelevent himself cried, "Go away, Monsieur Madeleine. I'm done for. Let me be, or you'll be killed too." Madeleine said nothing. The onlookers stood breathless. The cart wheels were still sinking, and it was already almost impossible for Madeleine to extricate himself. Then suddenly, the cart with its load was seen to rise slowly upward, its wheels half emerging from the quagmire. Crying in a stifled voice, "Hurry up! Help me!" Madeleine made his supreme effort. There was a sudden rush. The gallantry of a single man had lent strength and courage to all. The cart was lifted by 10 pairs of arms, and old Fauchelevent was saved. Madeleine got to his feet. He was white, although his face was running with sweat. His clothes were torn and caked with mud. The old man clasped him around the knees, invoking the name of God. His own expression was an indescribable mingling of distress and triumph, and he gazed calmly back at Javert, who was still fixedly regarding him. End of Chapter 6. Chapter 7. Fauchelevent becomes a gardener in Paris. Fauchelevent had broken a kneecap in his fall. Monsieur Madeleine had him taken to the infirmary, served by 2 Sisters of Mercy, which he had set up in his factory for the benefit of his workers. On the following morning, the old man found a 1,000-franc note on the bedside table, with a note in Madeleine's handwriting. "I am buying your horse and cart." The cart was damaged, and the horse was dead. Fauchelevent recovered, but with a permanently stiff knee. Acting on the advice of the sisters and the curé, Madeleine got him a job as gardener in a convent in the Saint-Antoine quarter of Paris. Shortly after this, Monsieur Madeleine was elected mayor, and when, for the first time, Javert saw him wearing the robes which vested him with full authority over the town, a tremor went through him, like that of a hound which scents a wolf in sheep's clothing. Thereafter, he avoided him whenever possible, and when his duties obliged him to have direct dealings with the mayor, he addressed him in terms of the utmost formality. In addition to the outward signs we have described of the prosperity brought to the town by Père Madeleine, there was a further indication, which was not the less significant for being invisible. It was a sure sign. When people are in trouble, because work is short and trade is bad, the taxpayer uses every device to resist and evade payment, and the state is put to considerable expense to collect its dues. When, on the other hand, A region is prosperous and work abundant, taxes are easily paid, and the cost of collecting them is small. It may be said, indeed, that the cost of tax collection affords an infallible index of the poverty or wealth of a community. During a period of 7 years, this charge on the authorities in the Montreuil-sur-Mer district had fallen by 3/4, a fact to which the Minister of Finance, Monsieur de Villèle, made frequent reference. Such was the state of affairs when Fantine returned to the town. No one remembered her, but fortunately the doors of Madeleine's factory were open. She found employment in the woman's workshop. The work was new to her, and she was not very good at it. Nor was the pay large, but it sufficed to solve her problem. It brought her a living. End of Chapter 7. Chapter 8. Madame Victurnien spends 35 francs in the cause of morality. When Fantine found that she could make ends meet, she had a moment of rejoicing. To be able to live by honest toil was like a blessing from heaven. Her natural readiness to work was genuinely revived. She bought a mirror, gazed with pleasure at her youth, her beautiful hair and white teeth, forgot a great many things, dreamed only of Cosette and her plans for the future, and was almost happy. She rented a small room and furnished it on credit against her future earnings, a survival of her disorderly habits. Not being able to claim that she was married, she was careful to say nothing about her daughter. At first, as we have seen, she was meticulous in her payments to the Thénardiers. Since she could only sign her name, she had to resort to a public letter writer. She sent frequent letters, and the fact was noted. It was whispered in the woman's workshop that she gave herself airs. No one is more avidly curious about other people's doings than those persons whom they do not concern. Why is a certain gentleman only to be seen at dusk, and why is another always away on Thursdays? Why does so-and-so always go by the back streets? Why does a certain lady always dismiss her fiacre before reaching home? And why does she send out for notepaper when she has plenty already? And so on. There are people who are prepared to devote as much time and resources to the answering of these riddles as would suffice for a dozen good deeds, and quite gratuitously, with inquisitiveness, its own reward. They will follow a person for days, keep watch at street corners and from doorways, at night, in cold and rain. They will bribe hall porters, tip cab drivers and lackeys, suborn chambermaids. And for what? For nothing. For the satisfaction of finding out, knowing, and unraveling, from an itch to disclose. And it can happen that these broadcast secrets, mysteries exposed to the light of day, are the cause of disaster. Duels, bankruptcies, ruined families, wrecked lives, to the delight of those who got to the bottom of it. From no personal interest, from instinct alone. It is a sad phenomenon. There are persons whose malice is prompted by the sheer need to gossip. Their conversation, drawing-room chatter, antechamber asides, resembles a wide hearth of the kind that rapidly burns up logs. They need plenty of fuel, and their fuel is their neighbor. So Fantine's doings were observed, besides which some of the women were jealous of her golden hair and white teeth. It was noted by the women in the workshop that at times she turned her head to wipe away a tear. There were moments when she was suddenly reminded of her child, and perhaps also of the man she had loved. The breaking of links with the past is a painful thing. It was discovered that she sent at least 2 letters a month, always to the same address, paying the postage in advance. The name of her correspondent was also discovered, Monsieur Thénardier, innkeeper at Montfermeil. The letter-writer, an elderly man who could not keep his mouth shut when his stomach was filled, was plied with wine in an alehouse, and so it became known that Fantine had a child. So that's the kind of woman she is. A townswoman made the journey to Montfermeil, talked to Thénardier, and on her return reported as follows. "It cost me 35 francs, but now I know everything. I've seen the child." The lady in question was a Madame Victurnien, an inflexible guardian of public morals. She was 56 and bore a countenance of mingled age and ugliness, with a shaky voice and a lively mind. Strange though it may seem, she had once been young. In the year 93, she had married a monk who had exchanged the tonsure for the red bonnet, going over from the Bernardins to the Jacobins. Dry, withered, acid, thorny, malicious, and venomous, she still lived on the memory of her departed monk, who who had ruled her with a rod of iron. After the Restoration, she had become a religious bigot to the point that the priests had forgiven her monk. She possessed a small property which she had ostentatiously bequeathed to a religious community, and she enjoyed the favor of the Bishop of Arras. This Madame Victurnien, then, went to Montfermeil and came back, saying, "I have seen the child." This was the month when Thénardier, having already raised the price from 7 francs to 12, raised it again to 15. Fantine's case was hopeless. She could not leave the district because she owed money for her rent and furniture, a sum of about 150 francs. She went and begged the workshop supervisor for money, who gave it to her but forthwith dismissed her. She had, in any case, been an indifferent worker. Overwhelmed by shame even more than by despair, she left the factory and took refuge in her room. Her fault was now known to everyone. She lacked the courage to plead her cause and did not venture to approach the mayor, although she was advised to do so. The mayor, by way of the supervisor, had given her 50 francs because he was kind, and had sent her away because he was just. She accepted the verdict. End of Chapter 8. Chapter 9. Madame Victurnien's Success. So the monk's widow had proved her worth. As for Monsieur Madeleine, he knew nothing whatever about the matter. Life is made up of these confusions. On principle, Madeleine almost never entered the women's workshop, having placed at its head an elderly spinster recommended to him by the curé. He had every confidence in his supervisor, a thoroughly respectable, honest woman, firm but fair-minded, imbued with the charity which is ready to give, but possessing less of the charity which understands and pardons. He trusted her in everything. The best of men are often obliged to delegate their authority, and it was in the full assurance that she was acting rightly that the supervisor had tried the case of Fantine, given judgment, and pronounced sentence. The 50 francs came from a fund which Monsieur Madeleine had placed at her disposal for the relief of employees in difficulties, and for which she was not required to account in detail. Fantine tried to find work as a servant, but no one would take her. She could not leave the town. The second-hand dealer who had supplied her furniture, and such furniture, said to her, "If you do, I'll have you arrested as a thief." Her landlord, to whom she owed rent, said, "You're young and pretty, you can pay." She divided the 50 francs between them, returned 3/4 of the furniture, keeping only the bare essentials, and found herself living without work or status, possessing nothing but a bed, and still owing about 100 francs. She did piecework stitching of shirts for the soldiers of the garrison, which brought her in 12 sous a day. Her child cost 10 sous. This was when she began to fall behind in her payments to the Thénardiers. An old woman who lived in the house taught her the art of living in penury. There are 2 stages, living on little and living on nothing. They're like 2 rooms, the first dark, the second pitch black. Fantine learned how to dispense entirely with a fire in winter, how to give up the tame bird which eats a handful of seed a day, how to turn a petticoat into a blanket, and a blanket into a petticoat, and how to save candles by eating by the light from the window across the street. The rest of us have little notion of the use that a fragile being, grown old in privation and honesty, can make of a single sou. It becomes a talent in the end, one that Fantine acquired, and with it a regrowth of courage. She said to her neighbor, "Well, what I say is, if I only sleep 5 hours a night and work the rest of the time, I can just about earn enough to live on. And when you're unhappy, you eat less. So, without work and not much food on the one hand, and grieving on the other, I can keep alive." To have had her child with her in her distress would have been happiness of a kind. She thought of sending for her, but was she to make her share her own destitution? And then she owed money to Thénardier. How was that debt to be paid, and how pay the cost of the journey? The old spinster who had instructed her in what may be termed the art of poverty was named Marguerite. She was truly devout, poor herself, and charitable, not only to the poor but also to the rich, just sufficiently educated to be able to sign her name Marguerite, and firm in her trust in God, which is the root of wisdom. There are many such virtuous souls in the depths who will one day rise higher. They are lives which have a tomorrow. At first, Fantine had been so overcome by shame that she had been afraid to leave the house. She felt in the streets that everyone looked at her. The heads turned, but no one greeted her. and this ostracism pierced her like a keen wind, body and soul. In a small town, the fallen woman is, as it were, exposed naked to the scorn and prying eyes of all comers. In Paris, she is at least unknown, and her anonymity is a garment. Fantine would have given all she possessed to be able to take refuge in Paris, but it was impossible. She had to learn to endure disdain as she learned to accustom herself to penury, and by degrees she did so. In 2 or 3 months, she had shrugged off her shame and went about as though nothing had happened, pretending not to care. She came and went with her head held high and a bitter smile on her lips, and felt that she was becoming brazen. Madame Victurnien, seeing her pass beneath her window and noting the wretched condition of the creature who, thanks to her public spirit, had been put in her place, was highly gratified. The cruel of heart have their own black happiness. Excess of work exhausted Fantine, and the small, dry cough from which she suffered grew worse. She said sometimes to Marguerite, "Feel how hot my hands are." But in the mornings, combing with a broken comb the hair that flowed like silk over her shoulders, she still had moments of happy vanity. End of Chapter 9. Chapter 10. Continued success of Madame Victurnien. Fantine had been dismissed at the end of the winter. She survived the summer, but then came the next winter. Shorter days and shorter working hours. Winter. No warmth, no light, no midday, morning merging into evening, fog, twilight, and nothing to be clearly seen through the misted window. The sky had become a grating, the day a cellar, the sun a poor man at the door. The terrible winter season, which turns the rain from heaven and the hearts of men to stone. Fantine's creditors were harassing her. She could not earn enough, and her debts grew. The Thénardiers bombarded her with letters, heartrending in tone and ominous in their exactions. They wrote to say that Cosette was obliged to go almost naked in the cold, and that at least 10 francs were needed to buy her a woolen dress. Receiving this letter, Fantine carried it crumpled in her hand throughout the day, and in the evening went to the barber at the corner of the street and withdrew her comb, letting her fair hair fall down to her waist. "Such beautiful hair," said the barber. "What will you give me for it?" she asked. 10 francs. "Then cut it off." She bought a woolen dress and sent it to the Thénardiers, who were furious. The money was what they wanted. They gave the dress to their daughter Éponine, and the little lark, Cosette, went on shivering. "My daughter's not cold any more," thought Fantine. "I've dressed her in my hair." She wore small mob caps to hide her shorn head, and still looked pretty. But a dark change was taking place within her. Now that she could no longer do up her hair, she conceived a hatred for all mankind. She had long shared the universal veneration for Père Madeleine, but now, by dint of telling herself that he had dismissed her and was the cause of all her troubles, she came to hate him more than any man. When she passed the factory gates at the time when the workers were waiting to be let in, she affected to sing and laugh derisively, which caused one old woman to remark, "There's a wench that'll come to a bad end." In a spirit of defiance and with fury in her heart, she took a lover, a chance acquaintance for whom she cared nothing. He was some sort of traveling musician, indolent and feckless. He beat her and finally left her, as repelled as she was herself. But still, she worshipped her child. The deeper she sank, the darker the shades that closed about her, the more radiant did that vision appear. "Some day I'll be rich and have Cosette with me," she said to herself, and this alone could cause her to smile. The cough did not get better, and she had night sweats. The following letter came from the Thénardiers. "Cosette has caught the disease that is sweeping through the region, what they call a military fever. The medicine is very expensive. It is ruining us, and we can no longer pay. If you do not send us 40 francs within a week, the child will die." This caused Fantine to burst into hysterical laughter, and she said to Marguerite, "How wonderful! A mere 40 francs, to Napoleon! Where do they expect me to get them? Are they mad?" She reread the letter standing by a window on the landing, and then, still laughing, ran downstairs and out into the street. To someone who asked what she found so funny, she replied, "A silly joke in a letter I've just had from some country people. They went 40 francs from me, poor ignorant peasants." Crossing the market square, she saw a crowd gathered round a strangely shaped vehicle from which a man clad in red was addressing them. He was an itinerant dentist selling sets of false teeth, opiates, powders, and elixirs. Drawing closer, Fantine joined in the laughter at his oratory, in which slang for the common people was interlated with high-flown language for the well-to-do, and seeing her laugh, the dentist cried, "You've got a fine set of teeth, my lass. If you'd care to sell me your 2 incisors, I'll pay you a gold Napoleon for each." "What are my incisors?" "Your 2 top front teeth." "How horrible!" exclaimed Fantine. "2 Napoleons?" grumbled a toothless old woman standing near. "She's in luck." Fantine fled, covering her ears to shut out the man's hoarse voice as he shouted after her. "Think it over, my girl. 2 Napoleons are worth having. If you change your mind, you'll find me this evening at the Tillac d'Argent." Fantine ran home in a fury of indignation and told Marguerite what had happened. "Would you believe it? The abominable man! How can they allow such creatures to travel round the country? He wanted to pull my 2 front teeth out. I should be hideous. Hair grows again, but not teeth. Monster! I'd sooner throw myself out of a top-story window. He said he'd be at the Tillac d'Argent this evening." "How much did he say he'd pay?" asked Marguerite. 2 Napoleons. "That's 40 francs. "Yes," said Fantine, "that's 40 francs. She went thoughtfully on with her work. After a quarter of an hour she stopped sewing and went on to the landing to reread the Thénardier's letter. She returned and said to Marguerite, "What is this military fever? Have you heard of it?" "Yes," said the old woman. "It's an illness." "Does it need a lot of medicine?" "Yes, very strong medicine." "How do you get it?" "It's just an illness that you catch." "And children catch it?" "Especially children." "Do they die of it?" "Very often," said Marguerite. Fantine left the room and went on to the landing to read the letter again. That evening she went out and was seen hurrying in the direction of the Rue de Paris, where the inns are. When Marguerite entered Fantine's room next morning, doing so before daybreak because they always worked together and thus could share a candle, she found her seated cold and shivering on her bed. She had not been to bed. She was sitting with her bonnet on her knees, and the candle, which had been burning all night, was almost burned away. Standing horror-stricken in the doorway, Marguerite cried, "Heavens, you've used up a whole candle. What has happened?" Fantine turned her cropped head towards her, and it seemed that she had aged 10 years overnight. "Lord preserve us!" cried Marguerite. "What's the matter with you?" "Nothing is the matter with me," said Fantine. "I'm happy. My baby isn't going to die of that dreadful disease for lack of medicine." She pointed to 2 Napoleons that lay gleaming on the table. "A fortune," murmured Marguerite. "A fortune. Where did you get them?" "I earned them," said Fantine. She smiled as she said it, and the candle lit her face. It was a blood-stained smile. There were flecks of blood at the corners of her mouth and a wide gap beneath her upper lip. She sent the 40 francs to Montfermeil. Needless to say, the Thénardiers were lying. Cosette was not ill. Fantine threw away her mirror. She had long since exchanged her small room on the 2nd floor for an attic under the sloping roof, against the beams of which she constantly bumped her head. Paupers cannot reach the end of their abode, or of their destiny, except by crouching ever lower. She no longer possessed a bed, but only a mattress on the floor, a tattered blanket, and a rickety chair. A potted rose in one corner of the room had died of neglect. In another corner was a butter tub which served as a water bucket. The water froze in winter, and its different levels were marked during long periods by rings of ice. She had lost all shame and was losing all personal pride. She wore soiled bonnets in the street and, from lack of time or from indifference, no longer mended her undergarments. As the heels of her stockings wore out, she stuffed the stockings down into her shoes, a fact which was apparent from their wrinkles. She patched her old, worn stays with fragments of calico, which tore at the least strain. The people to whom she owed money allowed her no peace, making scenes in the street and on the stairway. She spent whole nights in tears and brooding, her eyes overbright and with a constant pain in her back, at the top of her left shoulder blade. She coughed a great deal. Profoundly hating Père Madeleine, she uttered no complaint against him. She stitched 17 hours a day. But a contractor for prison labor, who was able to get the work done more cheaply, brought the free workers' daily wage down to 9 sous. 9 sous for 17 hours' work. Her creditors became more insatiable than ever. The second-hand dealer, who had got back nearly all his furniture, never stopped badgering her. In God's name, what more could she do? Feeling hunted, she developed some of the instincts of a wild beast. And then Thénardier wrote to say that his patience was at an end, and that if she did not send 100 francs forthwith, he would be obliged to turn Cassette out into the street, still convalescent after her grave illness, to fend for herself amid the rigors of the season, and live or die as the case might be. 100 francs! In what calling was it possible to earn 100 sous a day? There was only one. Well, thought Fantine, I may as well sell the rest. She became a prostitute. End of chapter 10.
And cut. That's a wrap, folks. Thanks for listening to today's episode of I've Been Meaning to Read That, with me, your host, Dan. If you want to learn more about the show, you can follow us on Instagram at Meaning to Read and TikTok at I've Been Meaning. If you want to support the show to help keep it going, you can find me on Venmo at Dingus Donut, DINGUSDONUT. Supporters get a shout-out on the show, and even more important, get to vote on the next book that we read. No matter what, I'll see you for our next episode. Until then, read those books you've been meaning to read, and have a lovely, lovely day.